Medieval warfare was full of brutal endings, but not every death came from a clean sword strike. Soldiers faced mud that suffocated them, fire that burned them alive, cavalry that crushed them, wounds that festered slowly, and executions carried out after the fighting ended. Each of these deaths reflected the harsh reality of war in the Middle Ages, where survival was uncertain, and even surrender could bring terrifying consequences. Number 1. The slow death in mud. On wet medieval fields, death often crept up from below. Heavy rain turned plowed ground into sticky clay that grabbed boots, sucked at greaves, and swallowed fallen men. In places like northern France and Flanders, narrow battlefields hemmed by woods or ditches funneled thousands into churned soil. So when waves of troops pressed forward, men slipped, were knocked down, and couldn't rise before the next crush rolled over them. The danger wasn't the absolute weight of armor-good field plate spread about 45-55 pounds across the body, but the combination of fatigue, suction, and crowd pressure. Once face down with a visor shut, breathing was harder, visibility was poor, and arms pinned under layered gear made self-rescue slow. A few seconds in thick mud felt like drowning on land. Chroniclers describe how dense formations magnified the problem. Front ranks went down, the mass behind piled on, and some suffocated where they fell, not from wounds, but from bodies and mire pressing them into the earth. At Agincourt, days of rain turned recently plowed fields to sludge, so armored men waded knee-deep while arrows, stakes, and collisions broke their rhythm. Many who stumbled were too spent to stand in time. Burgundian and French accounts talk about men so tightly packed they could scarcely raise weapons. English narratives add that once the first line collapsed, the heaped press killed the living beneath. Similar terrain traps show up elsewhere. At the Battle of the Golden Spurs, Flemish infantry drew French cavalry over marshy ground and streams, where horses bogged and riders sank into soft patches, then were finished at close range. Scottish forces at Bannockburn used pits and rough, wet ground to slow English mounted men, and once a rider or man-at-arms was down, the mud did as much as the spear. The mechanics are simple and grim. Clay grips sabatons. Gambeson and hose soak up water. A toppled fighter tries to roll to a knee, but gets pinned by a shield edge, a trampled comrade, or a panicked horse. Each failed attempt costs breath and strength. With the visor down to block shafts and splinters, air is hotter and thinner. With it up, mud and feet hit the face. Even skilled knights needed space to recover their stance space that close-packed melees didn't allow. Survivors later remembered the quietest deaths as the worst. Not the flash of a blade, but the muffled rasp of someone inches away, sinking deeper, while the battle moved on. Number 2. Burning alive. Fire was rare on open fields, but when it struck, it introduced a horror unlike any blade could deliver. During sieges, defenders used flaming arrows to set siege engines, ladders, or wooden structures alight, forcing attackers to pause under burning rain. Sometimes attackers themselves carried firebrands or torches, hoping to ignite wooden walls or gates. In a few recorded instances, defenders poured boiling oil, pitch, or tar down from battlements onto soldiers pressed against walls, burning them severely at close range. The oil would stick to armor, clothing, and flesh, turn into a searing coat that tore skin with even the slightest movement. One documented case from the siege of Caen in 1417 mentions a knight scaling walls who was struck by burning straw and perished in the flames. In medieval warfare, materials like wood, rope, cloth, and tar were everywhere, and dry weather would turn them into fuel. Armor trapped heat inwards, so once fire touched the padding, it became like an oven rather than a protection. Men caught on ladders, in narrow gate passages, or under overhanging beams fared worst. They couldn't escape sideways. Some chroniclers tell of soldiers running through smoke, their clothes ablaze, flailing arms hoping someone would help. But inside a melee, no one dared slow down. A burning man might roll, but armor prevented rolling freely. He might drop shield or helmet, but once the fire caught padding or hair, the flames spread fast. The pain was intense, muscles contracting, skin blistering, nerves screaming. Death often came not instantly, but after minutes of agony, as lungs inhaled smoke while external burns charred tissue. Many accounts mention that victims stayed conscious through much of the ordeal, writhing until they collapsed or were extinguished by water. In some variants, attackers used Greek fire, an incendiary liquid that burned even on water launched from tubes or grenades during sieges, though mostly in naval battles. Its formula remained secret, and it added another terrifying dimension to fire warfare. Fire terrified medieval soldiers more than many weapons because its effects were unpredictable and prolonged. In war journals and chronicles, some warriors preferred a quick blow to being burned, and many chose suicidal charges rather than facing the possibility of flame. Number 3. The crush of cavalry. Heavy cavalry charged with terrifying force. A single warhorse might weigh over 1,000 pounds and carry a knight in full armor. When cavalry hit dense infantry formations, the impact was devastating. Soldiers who couldn't scatter were trampled instantly. Bones shattered, ribs crushed, heads smashed. Chroniclers sometimes described aftermaths as a field of broken bodies, men twisted beyond recognition. In many encounters, the first wave downed dozens. The dying or fallen then became obstacles. Other riders and infantry pushed forward, stepping or riding over those bodies. Victims pinned under horses or amidst bodies often suffocated. Not from wounds, but from pressure. In tight melee, men were wedged so tightly that they couldn't raise swords or even breathe fully. During the Wars of the Roses, accounts speak of packed lines where a slip by one soldier caused a chain collapse, trapping dozens under weight and steel. At Towton, fighting in deep snow and mud made mobility harder. Once the first men slipped, cavalry and infantry drove over heaps of fallen. Archaeological evidence from mass graves confirms bodies bearing signs of trampling, broken limbs, and compression injuries. Cavalry didn't just kill in the charge. They turned victims into terrain. Horses themselves added chaos. They kicked, stomped, and battered men as they rolled. A man already down could be kicked in the skull, or pinned while a horse passed overhead. Sometimes wounded men were dragged under hooves as the battle surged. Even armor offered no safe barrier. A cuirass might resist a sword blow, but couldn't prevent crushing of internal organs under weight. One chronicler of the French wars noted a knight whose armor bent grotesquely from the pressure, then ruptured. In battles in Normandy and the 100 Years' War, cavalry charges broke infantry lines repeatedly, scattering formations and leaving piles of dead. At Verneuil, Milanese heavy cavalry penetrated the English lines, trampling defenders. The men-over-men pressure multiplied the horror. Wounded who might have had a chance were turned into dead by sheer volume. Sometimes survivors buried under bodies lay alive for hours until scavengers or silence forced retreat. In tight terrain, narrow passes, forest edges, or muddy fields, cavalry charges funneled into choke points, increasing crowding. Many commanders sought to prevent this by placing stakes, trenches, or blocking terrain to slow horses. But when that failed, the crashing weight of horse and man became a living execution engine. Number 4. Wounds that never healed. After the clash, many soldiers did not die on the spot. Their wounds turned into lingering traps. A blade might pierce a thigh, an arrow lodge in a shoulder, or a mace crack ribs. These injuries often went deep into flesh and bone. Medieval battlefield surgeons had limited tools and knowledge. They understood bleeding a bit, but germs were invisible mysteries. They used linen, wool, moss, sometimes honey or vinegar, to dress wounds, hoping to staunch flow and discourage rot. Some texts from the 13th century show surgeons aware that cleaning a wound helped. They sometimes used wine or boiled water to cleanse cuts. Certain surgeons like Theodoric of Lucca insisted that wounds should not be left to fester and chipped away at the idea that pus is always good. But the reality was harsh. Many wounds infected. The damp, filthy conditions of camps and fields spread bacteria and flies. During the 100 Years' War, records note that after battles troops often died days later of fever, swelling, abscesses. When pus and dead flesh built up, gangrene took hold. Infected tissue turned black or green, smelled foul, and exuded fluids. Men writhed in pain, limbs swelling, joints stiff. Some lay for days in agony. delirious, screaming. Gut wounds were worst. If an arrow or sword pierced the abdomen, intestines might be exposed. Without antiseptic knowledge or surgical sterilization, infections spread across internal organs. Surgeons might attempt to stitch or cauterize, but often worsened injuries. Amputation was an option in extreme cases, but performed without anesthetic, and risked hemorrhage or later infection. Many died during or after these crude operations. Skeletons unearthed in medieval mass graves show bones with cut marks where limbs were removed and evidence of bone infection, osteomyelitis. Chroniclers describe swollen limbs so tight that skin split, fluid dripping. In some battles, commanders ordered severely wounded to be abandoned, to stop enemy capture or slow the retreat. Wounded men were stripped of arms and gear and left in fields. Some died slowly overnight.